Hello and welcome to Watchworthy. It's your co-host, Brother Ash.
And I'm Miss Chris D.
And on today's episode, we're going to be covering Gary, the 2024 Peacock documentary about the all-star, the late Gary Coleman. Everybody knows Gary Coleman for his role on Diff'rent Strokes, just kind of being that guy that pop up just to say that one line.
Yeah.
We all know what it is. Gary Coleman, like I said, I grew up knowing who he was. He was huge back in the day from that show, and we covered this just because we wanted to take a deeper dive to what his experience was in Hollywood and how he came to be, the worldwide, celebrity that everybody knew him for. So while you guys watch, we want to know if you had to cast Gary Coleman right now, if he were still alive, obviously, to revive his career, right? To give him a role that would, put him back on top and, put him in a position where he could, be successful. What would you do? I would have loved to typecast him in some type of action show or something, just because that seemed to be his dream, and maybe make him some type of boss that just knows a lot of powerful people, who just sit back and orchestrates a lot of things. Kind of like a mastermind. I think he would be a good mastermind.
Definitely, I can see that. I think that people didn't give him enough credit because of his stature. But Gary Coleman is like Black history to me. It's crazy that Diff'rent Strokes came out in the 70s, yet we still knew who he was in the 2000s, So
Yeah.
I definitely could see him, like you said, in kind of a mob position or something. Like the small guy that everybody's afraid of. Or I would probably still cast him in a comedy, but maybe a more serious comedy. Maybe like you said, maybe like an Ozark or something, or Arrested Development. I don't know why I could just see him kind of riffing with Jason Bateman. Sadly, we'll never get to see these come to fruition because Gary passed away. But just to think, if we had the power back then, somebody just should have gave him these opportunities,
Yeah.
So let's jump into it, and just think about that poll question if you're listening on Spotify, or you can comment on YouTube. Let us know your favorite Gary Coleman moments or what you would cast him in. But a little bit about his background and his early life. Gary Coleman was born to Sue and Willie Coleman in Zion, Illinois in 1968. They seem kind of like some good old Midwestern country folks. His dad had quite a thick accent. So Gary, I guess, would have been in his 50s by now if he was born in 1968. And his mom says that he was always an entertainer, even as a kid. Both his parents were in the documentary. They weren't sitting together, so they're probably split by now.
Mm-hmm.
But
they just stay married and hate each other's
Yeah.
guts. Y'all know how them older couples be.
Yeah. They were not even filmed in the same room. But they said that he was always an entertainer ever since he was a kid. And around age 2, that's when they found out that Gary was sick. He started to run a fever, and they found out that he had a kidney disease. So around the age of 5, what a young age. So small, just a small child. That's when he got his first kidney transplant. And, he was still very active and tenacious after getting the transplant. They said 2 weeks after the transplant, he was still running around, standing on his head. So they're like, okay, this kid is a ball of energy. We need to do something with this.
Yeah, kids have that type of energy though.
He was a fighter. Yeah, if I had a kidney transplant, I would be bedridden.
Granted, clearly, Gary Coleman was one of a kind, but when you're a kid, that's how you bounce back from stuff. It's
Very
crazy.
resilient. Yeah. And so this was the red flag for me, y'all. This was the shocker for me. For some reason, I didn't know about his kidney disease and all that. I just thought that he had some type of illness that made him short in stature. Turns out the immunosuppressant drugs after his transplant, that's what stunted Gary Coleman's growth. So I guess I put a red flag because it's damn, back in the 70s, we didn't have any other option to help him not become this, short in stature, because he ended up being 4'8" for the rest of his life. And so after that, they were told that he was only going to live until the age of 12, but we know that he lived on to the age of 42.
Yeah.
So they said that from around 1985 until his death, Gary Coleman lived with no kidneys and had frequent dialysis. Now, I don't know if y'all know about dialysis, but I had an uncle on dialysis before, and it's very draining for just everyday people. So imagine if you're also a celebrity who has to go to set, to and from movies, people pulling you and pushing you this way and that way, and you also have to make time for dialysis. So they said that it was very hard for him, especially being a child actor, going through all that.
Yeah, so his health was a pretty large concern for him early. So when he was around 7 years old, he came across this agent, or I guess the agent came across him, Victor Perillo. In Harris Bank, it was like a Harris Bank commercial, in 1977. And I kind of laugh watching it because for him to be like around like 6, 7 years old, he seemed to have like so much personality. Like, obviously when he got older in his career, he still got like roles where he was playing a younger character. But for him to be 7 years old, like he spoke like an adult. Like
Yeah.
he was so well rounded, like the way he just like moved through his lines. He was saying like, yeah, start an account with $200 and or add $200 to an existing account. And I'm just like, dang,
He
like
sounded like a little grown man.
word.
Yeah.
So, you could tell like he had talent, which is kind of upsetting that he kind of continued to get typecast because he probably would have killed some different type of roles. So Norman Lear was a big shot producer back in the 70s. And his scout saw Gary and, brought him out to LA. LA is a place to be when you're a young talent in America. So Gary guest starred on Good Times. Everybody knows Good Times. My mom always talks about how Good Times was the show that all the black people watch. It's the show, with his family, living in the projects, and they're just, hanging on to each other. So he's this guest star. He gets on the show. He steals everybody's heart. And that just leads to more and more opportunities for him. So he thought it was cool. He said, I thought it was cool. This was fun. And wait, I get paid for this?
Yeah, so he's just trying to he just wanted to be fun and act. He didn't think about like turning it into a career. You're 7 years old.
So like y'all all like, it probably was you and your family, but like we all have that one cousin that just seems to know how to work a room. And that was Gary Coleman. So like he really was just happy to be able to, make money and, help his family out just by being himself. So a lot of people thought that he was smart. Todd Bridges was 13 when the show started, and he said, quote, he was so smart, he was so ingenious and just funny. Todd Bridges was the guy Willis in the show. So that's who, he used to say what you talking about to everybody, but we know him for saying what you talking about, Willis.
Yeah. And we know that it was good to see Todd Bridges in the documentary because there have been other documentaries about child actors and how Todd and Dana from the show didn't fare very well, after the show ended. But luckily he's healthy, he's happy, and he was in this documentary. So it was good to see Todd Bridges.
Yeah, so and everybody kind of talked about, especially people that knew Gary as a child, talked about like his imagination. He often talked about like outer space, and he had such a vivid way of describing things that were just in his mind. So a lot of people were impressed by that for a kid that, didn't have a lot of experiences before he ended up, getting into Hollywood and acting and stuff. So
it sounded like he was just talented all around, like,
yeah.
I love how I learn a little bit more about people when I watch these documentaries, like, oh, he was an actor and he drew and he wrote and he produced,
And I just want to put like a red flag for Hollywood because Hollywood just has such a way of painting a certain picture for fans that you kind of expect this. And we'll get into this later in the documentary, but like everybody that knows Gary Coleman, I guess unless you were a diehard fan, you would learn so much by watching this documentary. Like he was not just a dude that just walked around saying what you talking about Willis all day.
Yeah, he actually hated that.
Yeah.
So Dion Mile, he was Gary's childhood friend. He was in the documentary and he's in his 50s now. He told us that he had a teacher who was like, oh, you got to check out this up and coming star on set, Gary Coleman. And so the teacher brought Dion to set, and that's how he met Gary. He was 4 years older than Gary, but they became friends, which isn't abnormal. But let's put a red flag right now because while watching the documentary, Brother Ash just thought he was a little off.
Well,
I don't know what it is exactly, but I don't know. It just seemed like
it's kind of like if you guys go back and watch this documentary, you'll see what Dion says Gary's experience was and what the family and what his agent says. Kind of like it's black and white at times. And it's hard to kind of read if Dion was truly just a friend and a mentor or if he had other, interests in Gary Coleman. So I don't know. The jury's still out on that. I did think he had his best interest at heart sometimes, but show business could be one of those really, really shady kind of businesses. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I put a red flag as well because I just feel like Gary's not here to tell us the truth. So we have to take Dion's word for it, or we have to take the parent side. And you'll learn later on, it's kind of like them versus him. And so, Dion was just giving a little bit about the backstory and how he still has Gary's memorabilia in his garage to this day. So clearly, Gary trusted him enough to keep his prized possessions with him. So in the documentary, they went into his garage. He showed us all of his old memorabilia. That was really cool to see. I'm surprised that he's not selling it on eBay or anything. So that shows that he was a true friend. And so Dion said that he had never seen a kid that was even more dynamic than Gary Coleman. Like, he's never seen anybody like that. And I think that was just, a repeating and recurring thing going on in the documentary. Everybody was like, he was so smart. He was so funny. We had no idea where this kid came from. So it was just really incredible to witness.
Yeah.
And he said that since they were so close and they grew up together, he had a front row seat to Gary's success. He truly called himself his best friend. Throughout the documentary, we saw some other friends, but they were kind of just white women. So it seemed like Dion was definitely like his closest black male friend. Diff'rent Strokes was the first time on TV that there was really a blended family portrayed on television. And that was unfavorable to white people. Red flag.
Yeah.
It was unfavorable to black people as well. So
yeah, another red flag. Yeah. Everybody just had a problem with it. Well, I guess not everybody, but there were just two sides of why white people would not like it and why black people wouldn't like it. So
yeah, so it was the 70s. It was, you have to be the first to do something, and it was very groundbreaking. And so a lot of people didn't like it because if you think about it, it's kind of like a white savior complex. Like, a rich white man adopts these two black kids. But they were just trying to show that he was a good man, period. It didn't matter that he was white. And so overall, the show did prove that love conquers all. It was a very heartfelt storyline. It went on for 8 seasons, so clearly it was good enough to somebody. Yeah. And so a lot of celebrities came on the show. They showed, everybody from Nancy Reagan, Muhammad Ali. Mr. T was very popular at the time, so he would come on the show. And like Brother Ash said, Gary always had to do that iconic line, "What you talking about?" And, it just kind of grew into something larger than life. He was on the cover of every magazine. He was becoming a household name. And then he also featured in some NBC films and feature films. So his career was really growing.
So he's taking off at this point. And like Miss Chris D mentioned earlier with his parents being really old school by the book, Gary was in the position to where he's not even a teenager yet. He's his parents' boss. Mm-hmm. So, that's very strange, and that took a psychological toll on him, as it would for any kid. We covered something, previously on this show about child stars and how strange that dynamic could be when, the family's primary income is coming from a kid. You know what I'm saying?
Red flag for me.
Yeah. So
that's what we learned in Quiet on Set. Yeah.
So Willie Coleman, Gary Coleman's father, was very vocal about his son. And how he needed his son to be the lead of the show, and it went to Gary's head. So Willie Coleman would speak out on set if he felt like, Gary wasn't getting enough, primetime attention, or if his lines were getting shorter or whatever the case may be. Gary would also be sick on set because of his health concerns, like throwing up. And this was a red flag to me because people kind of said that Willie Coleman would push him to keep working, people depending on you got to fight through this pain, while his take was, oh, I don't ever remember it being like that. Whenever he was really in pain, I didn't make him do anything, but I was, a father is supposed to, he's supposed to encourage your kids to fight through adversity, but it's a little different when you're 9 years old and you have kidney problems.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
But it's
so
really a he said, she said. Some people are like, nah, I remember it this way. And then the parents are like, no, we never did that. So
like we said earlier, the best friend was yeah, nah, I seen it. I seen him bent over, throwing up, and his dad basically giving him a pep talk, get your ass back out there. You got money to make. So the show wasn't maturing Gary's character at all because, like we mentioned, his health concerns stopped him from growing. The medicine he was taking stunted his growth. So, the characters around him was getting older, you know what I'm saying? But Gary's still looking the same from when the show started. So
I feel like his face was aging. You could tell he was becoming a teenager, but his body wasn't. So it was awkward because they was still having him be like, oh yes, daddy. And he's not a little kid anymore,
Yeah. So that frustrated Gary. So Arnold Jackson,
That was
that was his character, and like as we said, Arnold Jackson wasn't growing up, so he really felt like it was a meal ticket, and he kind of felt like they're making me stay this way, and it kind of makes you feel more like a instrument of money and not an actual actor. Like he's getting to the point in his career where he wants to be able to mature and have issues that a teenager would have. But like she said, like they kind of still making him like say little kitty stuff, little stupid stuff. So like, yeah, that was a whole thing. I can't imagine what that was like. So Diff'rent Strokes was canceled in 1986. Gary was 18 and then he went into a deep depression. He didn't want to work in show business, and his entourage was not trying to hear that. His parents was trying to get him to take gigs. His agent was, so like Gary was like telling people like, yo, like I'm done. Like
I would be too.
Like Diff'rent Strokes was depressing. I done made me enough money. Like I'm 18 now. Like, and everybody's like, nah, bro. Like,
and that was the selfish part. They just wanted to line their pockets. They didn't care about his mental health. Especially in the 80s. Nobody was talking about mental health in the 80s.
Yeah, so like we said, his agent was still out there trying to get gigs for him. Gary got pushed to the point where he became suicidal. And
red flag,
yeah,
because no amount of money, no acting opportunities are worth your mental health. And so if somebody is telling you, hey, I would rather kill myself than work, leave them alone.
So this was like a red flag situation for me. Just because of how it kind of happened. So his friend Dion, responds to a night that Gary was, having a hard time, having suicidal thoughts. And Gary just basically said, I want to get away from all of this. So they go to Hawaii and kind of get away. And during this trip is when Gary starts to realize like, yo, what's going on with all my money? Blase, blase. That was a red flag. But the main red flag for me was Dion kind of being the guy to like, coerce him to believe less in his agents and his family and more so into him. Now, ideally, it was a good thing, but it just seemed like, I don't know, something about him. It just kind of seemed like, is he trying to get in to, become the guy that gets the 10%, or was he really trying to look out for his friend? And we don't ever know. So I don't want to accuse him of doing that, but it was just kind of like, all right, now you're on the boat with Gary Coleman and all this money in Hawaii, and I don't know, man.
No, I agree. I feel like if I felt like, hey, Brother Ash, your agent is doing you dirty, I'm not going to be like, that's why I should be your agent. I'm going to just be like, I'm your friend and I'm letting you know.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like he just wanted to get into the industry. But Dion claimed like he came from money and his family was already in the industry, so he didn't need Gary's money. That's what he said in the documentary.
Word. I mean, that's something that you would say if you was trying to convince people that you didn't have ulterior motives. But on the other side, his parents was like, yeah, he started surrounding himself with people that wasn't good for him. Hint, hint, Dion.
Because Dion was literally the only person around. That's why I'm trying to tell y'all, like, there was no other friends. There was like, especially black people, like, nah, sis, you need to check that. And you gonna ask maybe 3-4 aunties, like, hey, do you see a problem with this? But he only had one person in his ear. So that's what made it a little suspicious. I'm like, dang, you don't got no other friends?
I was excited that at least Gary was now in a position where he could call his own shots. So even if, Dion wasn't what was best for him, he could make that decision himself, because now he was 18 and, he deserved to be able to call the shot. So he made Dion his official agent, business manager, and then he hired Drew Rice as his lawyer to see about his money and all of the things that he had.
Yeah, so with Drew Rice now on board to look through the numbers, this is the breakdown that they share in the documentary, and it's going to blow your mind. It's really sad how much they were bleeding Gary. So he made $18 million back in the day from Diff'rent Strokes and, all his little movies that he was in. In 1999, there was a 2020 episode that kind of revealed what the breakdown was. They said that his parents took 20% off the top. Now, we could fight about this all day. Like, if you're a child actor, do you owe them anything? They brought you into this world. I don't know. Like, now that's 20%.
20% is, for me, like 10% or 11% is kind of like the range for managers. I think that's standard.
Yeah, they were his managers.
So it's like, oh, mom get 10% and dad get 10%? Like, if y'all his parents and y'all married, shouldn't y'all just get 10%?
It was a lot.
Between each other, right? You know what I mean? Like,
So they took 20%, then his agent took 10%, then the business manager took 5%, then the lawyers took 7.5%, and then he also had 25% in a blocked account. Now, I understand the blocked account situation. He was a child. Yes, we should put away some money so he can't touch it until he's 18, whatever. But the problem was his parents were taken from that account.
Red flag.
Yeah, big red flag. They were putting his money into all these different investments, like property and stuff, real estate, that actually ended up failing. So these were bad investments. You stole his money. So now the money's gone forever. And I just feel like that wasn't fair because, again, he was a child or at least a teenager. Once he became a teenager, once he became 18, all y'all had to do was ask him. Maybe he would have even been on board, but you didn't ask him. You just started taking his money.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there was also some, quote, loans found of like $300,000 worth. And these loans were like going into a pension. I'm putting air quotes.
Red flag.
Yeah, many red flags.
Because they got so quiet during this part of the documentary.
Yeah.
Like, this is where blank faces were shown. This is where nobody had answers, which tells me that, like, the pensions and the loans was just crazy. We know what that is. You were taking money from your child because you didn't think he would ever notice.
The mom was like, well, it was for a pension. But then, like, they were just stuttering over their words. Yeah, like, even to this day, they really don't have a great explanation.
Then the investments, I think the investments were just poorly managed. They didn't know how to handle the invest. You don't invest in something. Maybe somebody was in their ear, but you just don't invest in something and not take care of it. That's an easy way to lose money, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, it was really sad to see that because, again, the child is the employee. They're the ones breaking their back. Literally, Gary was sick, working on set, doing 8 seasons of a show, and then he ended up being broke. Like, that's not fair at all.
No.
And so Dion in the documentary, he was saying, like, I'm not trying to say that his parents stole from him intentionally, but like they stole and then didn't admit it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, maybe I didn't know that was from the blocked account, but now that I did, I'm not sorry, you know? So yeah, that's basically what was going on in the documentary. Again, it was like, these people are still living. Gary is not. It's their word versus his. And so Gary felt very betrayed, very abandoned. He ended up suing his parents and his agent. And so all of this went to a public conservatorship trial. This is, remember with Britney Spears when her daddy was trying to take her money and control her money and say she was out of her mind? We know that Gary was not out of his mind. Yeah. He was just simply a small man. That's it.
He had a couple of publicity stunts while he was alive, but he was by no means like a Kanye West type celebrity when he was 18 years old.